Dive. 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 Here we go again. It's another tale on the Midwatch. And once again, it's not really a submarine story, even though the name of the channel is Submarine Stories, because this is a story about me being in boot camp. So, in my last story, I told the story of how I spent my 19th birthday in restriction for having borrowed a keg of beer and drank that keg of beer from the club in Orlando, Florida, down there at A School. And one of my shipmates contacted me and said, "Oh my God, Pat, you went to Captain's Mast in A School? I don't think anybody's ever been at Captain's Mast that fast in their career. What on earth did you do?" And anyway, the conversation came up and I said, well, that actually was not my first Captain's Mast. It was my second. So now I'm here to tell you about the first time I went to Captain's Mast, which was actually still during boot camp while I was in Great Lakes, Illinois in July of 1979. So it was rather innocent from where I stand. I wasn't like some kind of heathen running amok and being crazy, exactly, sort of, ish. I got out of boot camp though, and it was I kind of remember the date. My father had passed on July 20th, 1970, and on July 20th, 1979, I was getting ready to graduate boot camp, and the weekend before, they had a Liberty trip where you could go into downtown Chicago on a bus, and they would take you to the USO, and they would feed you, and there was some very nice semi-Christian sort of things that happened there, and they would give you a little Bible or the Psalms or some little book like that I had. I put it in my raincoat. We had to fold up our raincoat and have it on the back of our rig with our white shirt, black pants, and our combination cap. And so I had these two really good friends. One was the guy that I shared a bunk with in boot camp, and his name was Glenn Life. And man, if you ever wanted to see somebody flame on, all you had to do was say, "Life's a bitch." And Glenn was through the roof every time. But he and I had spent pretty much all of boot camp together. Me being an LE and him being an LI, our names were right together. So every time they would move racks as people left, and he and I would either be upper bunk or lower bunk, and move on down toward because they would not keep racks open in the middle. They just kept moving you down to where things, kind of mattered out. So he was on top sometimes, I was on the bottom sometimes we were in a bunk next to each other, but we were always close by because we were LE and LI. And the other guy, the third musketeer in our little party, was a guy named Tyrone Henson. And I stand about 5'11". I kind of like to think that I'm 6 foot, but I'm 5'11". And I think Glenn was about my height, but Tyrone Henson was about 6'4", and he was this big black kid from North Carolina, and he was just the nicest, smilingest, happiest guy. You could not piss off Tyrone Henson. He was just the nicest kid you ever met, and we became friends. And he would say, "Hey Pat, what do you say we go down and check out that ball game? The Cubs are playing the Braves. I kind of like the Braves." So off we went to the USO, and we got a bus ride into downtown Chicago, and they fed us hot dogs, and we were going to go get to see the Cubs play, and they were playing the Atlanta Braves. And as I recall, I don't remember the score because, my God, we're talking, it was 40 years ago, but I do remember the Cubs won. And the Cubs were one of them teams, they didn't have lights yet, and they very, very famously didn't have lights for years and years and years. So the game started early, and we got there, and I don't know, it was probably 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the game started, and we were in the bleachers, and we were in our uniforms, and there were probably about 30 or 40 sailors up there, and we'd kind of mingle around, and people would buy sailors beer. And nobody asked, hey, Pat, are you 17 years old? It was kind of like, hey, Swabby, you want a beer? And you'd walk up to the counter to buy peanuts or popcorn or souvenir or something, and it'd be like, hey, sailor, have a beer. And, I was 17, and I wasn't used to drinking very heavily or anything, but I had drank before. In high school, I had a little incident here and there. But, so I ended up drinking a bunch of beer. I mean, like a lot of beer. And we left the game, and we had a little time to kill before we had to catch the bus. So, we kind of went back to the USO, and on the way, right there on the street, the USO was on the second floor, up a big flight of stairs, and there were all these nice ladies up there, and they were kind of like your mom, and it's kind of like, oh, would you boys like some cookies? Can we get you something? Would you like to play ping pong? And it's kind of like, well, no, not really. But on the way back to the USO, one of my cohorts, and I'm not sure who it was, but it may have been Tyrone, said, hey, let's check and stop out and look at this club. And it was a place called the L&M Club. And L&M clubs kind of had a famous reputation at the time, and they were kind of rather off-limits kind of clubs to guys coming out of boot camp. And they were off-limits kind of clubs because all the women inside took their clothes off inside, and they watered down the drinks, and there were riots that went on over this, and there was just all kinds of different things. And it turns out that this was the season of the riot in 1979. At the end of the year, there were several riots that happened at the Great Lakes Boot Camp, and some of them were over L&M clubs in the Great Lakes area because they were fleecing sailors, cheating sailors, stealing their money. Some guys were actually saying they were drugged in these clubs, and then all their money would get stolen, and the girls were thieves, and there was drugs involved and all kinds of stuff. But it wasn't any of that for us. We were in Chicago, which is, I don't know, probably 30, 40 miles away from Great Lakes, on a bus, on a Navy bus, one of the big white Navy buses. It's like a school bus, and we got there, and on the way back to catching the ride at the USO, we stopped into this place, and I was kind of like, I'd never seen all of that. I didn't know that sort of thing happened. I wasn't naive. I was 17 years old. I was rather suave and debonair. I was in the United States Navy, but I hadn't seen any of that before. And my, oh my, they had my attention. So we were in this club probably for 30, 40 minutes, so we had a couple of drinks, and it was like, oh my, that is something I just won't write home to Mom about at all, right? But we got to the USO, and by that time, I'd had now a couple of mixed drinks. I'd had all kinds of beer, and we got there and went upstairs, and they were getting ready. They assembled us in queues to put us on the bus, and I very distinctly that Tyrone Henson went down the stairs before me, and Glenn Life was somewhere behind me. And as we got near, like he came down, and there was a landing about halfway. I got to the landing, and I kind of, the world went around in a big swirling drain, and down the stairs I went. And Tyrone made it through the door, and I didn't. And we got to the bottom, because I went crash right through the plate glass window of the USO right there on the street in downtown Chicago. And while I was laying there, halfway hanging through the door, the top part of the door, the glass actually fell like a guillotine and would have cut me in half or God knows what. But Tyrone grabbed me and pulled me through. So now fast forward about an hour or so, and we have now arrived back at the base. And as we're getting to the base, there's a police car on fire right outside the base. There's a riot going on. We had nothing to do with the riot. We're a couple of squids. We're drunk. Actually, there's three of us. It's Glenn Life, Tyrone Henson, and Patrick LeBlanc, and there we are. And there's a black kid and a white kid and a guy that's kind of a little bit like Asian looking, and all three of them have blood all over them. It was my blood, none of theirs. It was all mine because I got cut up a little bit on the glass. And anyway, their uniforms are disheveled. Everything's torn up. And we're in this bus, and as they come on the bus, and they're, what the hell's going on here? Like we're involved in the riots or something. We're just coming back to boot camp, for God's sake. They're going to take us down there through the tunnel, and it's all going to be over. But we get there, and it's like surreal. It's like something out out of a movie, right? There's a police car on fire. There's mobs of people in the street. There's things going on. People throwing stuff at the bus, and it's like, oh my God! But we're there, and we get off the bus, and you're in white shirts and black pants, and the white shirts are kind of ripped up, and there's blood all over. And the next thing you know, somebody says, "Look at them! They've been rioting." No. That's not how it was. But you had an Asian guy, a black guy, and a white guy, and there was blood during a riot, and it was all of a sudden we were rioters. So that happened on a Saturday, or maybe it was Friday. Actually, I think it was Friday night, because come Monday or Tuesday we were going to Captain's Mast, and through no fault of their own whatsoever, and I greatly apologize. Glenn Life, if you're out there somewhere, Tyrone Henson, you're out there somewhere, gentlemen, I hope you had a wonderful career in the United States Navy. But they both got fined $25 on my behalf because they were involved and they were drunk. And you weren't supposed to drink when you're on graduation liberty, and it was pretty obvious we've been doing some drinking on graduation liberty. So there we were out. They both got fined $25. Well, mine was a little more than that. I got fined $25 for being drunk on liberty, and I got fined the cost of the door, which was about $150. They had replaced the plate glass in the USO door. I threw up on the bus, and they had to clean the bus, and that was about $100. And there was some second-class petty officer who did absolutely nothing wrong except talk to me, and I threw up on him too, and I had to pay for his dry cleaning. But so in the big scheme of things, we got to Captain's Mast, and there were like 180 people or something that went to Captain's Mast then, and I was on the second day. They started Captain's Mast on Mondays there, and they went through all these people, and then the second day they rolled over on a Tuesday, and we were the last three ass clowns to go to Captain's Mast, and this guy's name was Captain Self. And he was a nice guy. I'm sure he was a nice old man, and he was an 06. And his last official act in the whole United States Navy before they cut him loose over this, because he lost control of his command. He lost his job. The last three things that he did in the Navy was take me to Captain's Mast, Tyrone Henson to Captain's Mast, and Glenn Life to Captain's Mast. And I got fined a total of about $400 altogether. And like I said, Tyrone and Glenn both got $25 apiece for being drunk on Boot Camp Liberty. But this poor man lost his job. But there were riots, and some of them were founded because people were getting ripped off. They were getting taken to the cleaners, so to speak. And some of the cleaning places were involved in this, right? I mean, you go down there and cash your check, and they charge you $5 to cash your check. And it was easier to cash a check out in town than it was in a base, because you didn't have to wait in line. But everything you did, all the people in North Chicago around the base were involved in like fleecing sailors out of some money. And the sailors got tired of it. And it was nasty. Things weren't right. Things were going on. There were prostitutes. There was just all kinds of nasty drug stuff going on. There was everything you could think of that you could screw a sailor out of was happening right there in downtown North Chicago, right outside the base. So the sailors got tired of it, and the riots happened, and police cars burned. They tore down part of the fence. They threw rocks at the train. There was a train that ran from there into Wisconsin, and some of the dumbasses were out there throwing rocks at the train as it went by. And of course, they got arrested, and it's never a good thing to be involved in a riot. If it ever comes to you and the riot is happening, it's probably a good idea if you watch the riot go by or you go somewhere else. But completely unbeknownst to us three guys, we were involved in a riot, and we went to Captain's Mast. And that was my story on what happened to me as I got out of boot camp in July of 1979, before I went off and headed off to submarine school in Groton, Connecticut. So I hope you enjoyed my story and how I went to Captain's Mast for basically being drunk and stupid. There's a lot of drunk and stupid in my story, isn't there? That's why Pat's an alcoholic. That's why Pat has to go to meetings now, because there was a whole bunch of drunk and stupid all the way along my whole Navy career. But it happened. I paid for it, and I don't think that I ever went to USO again until after I was out of the Navy. I was at an airport one time and they said, well, the USO's right over there and you use the phone for free. And I was like, I don't really go to the USO. They don't like me there very much because, they're like, well, the USO's for everybody. I said, yeah, but there's that door I paid for in downtown Chicago. And I don't want to have to buy them another one in case I happen to get drunk and stupid. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my story. I hope you have a great Navy day. Hope you had a great Navy night. And we'll see you next time on Submarine Stories.